Like the dance? Huh?
Yeah. Dan and Amy, it's election day, don't you know? Taking your calls all morning about what's happening in your polling place and your closing arguments for candidates up and down the ballot, as well as ballot initiatives. We were just talking about that Rhodes Amendment that's on the Illinois ballot. Before we get to Steve Cortes, a Trump surrogate, this Julian Assange interview with John Pilger is important. John Pilger is this Australian journalist, is in London, kind of anti-American, certainly anti-American foreign policy. So they have a lot in common, do Pilger and Assange. Assange, not a hero, but his perspective on all of the emails that have been WikiLeaked throughout the duration of this campaign is notable. Doesn't mean that everything he says is untrue. In fact, a lot of what he says is true, and there's the emails to prove it. And so the question was put to him, Assange, by Pilger, the most significant email that was revealed by WikiLeaks this campaign. And I think he gave a pretty good answer. I would agree with that.
There's a early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton, so not so long after she left Secretary of State, to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS, is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Now, this is I think this is the most significant email in the whole collection. And perhaps because Saudi and Qatari money is spread all over the place, including into many media institutions. All serious analysts know, even the US government has mentioned or agreed with that some Saudi figures have been supporting ISIS, funding ISIS. But the dodge has always been that's it's just some rogue princes using their cut of the oil money to do whatever they like, but actually the government disapproves. But that email says that no, it is the governments of Saudi and the government and Qatar that have been funding ISIS.
So the same people that Hillary Clinton communicates are funding ISIS are funding the Clinton Foundation to the tune of millions of dollars. We just talked yesterday about the $1 million donation that was confirmed from Qatar in violation of the memorandum of understanding that Hillary Clinton had as the predicates are being confirmed as Secretary of State.
Was that the $1 million that was given to him on his birthday? Or that was a gift from somebody else?
You had the...
Because there's so many different millions of dollar donations. It's hard to keep it straight. So I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
And then the Assange goes on, too. So there's that piece of it. The same people funding ISIS are funding the Clinton Foundation. And then the pay-to-play component in terms of arms sales.
The Saudis, the Qataris, the Moroccans, the Bahrainis, particularly the Saudis and the Qataris, are giving all this money to the Clinton Foundation, while Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State, and the State Department is approving massive arms sales, particularly to Saudi Arabia.
Under Hillary Clinton, and our Clinton emails reveal significant discussion about it, the largest ever arms deal in the world was made with Saudi Arabia, more than $80 billion. In fact, during her tenure as Secretary of State, total arms exports from the United States, in terms of their dollar value, doubled.
And of course, the consequence of that is that this notorious terrorist jihadist group called ISIL or ISIS is created largely with money from the very people who are giving money to the Clinton Foundation.
Yes.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, extraordinary indeed. Extraordinary so connect those dots, all of you Hillary supporters. You want to talk about a closing argument. Enemies of the state funding the Clinton Foundation, she in turn authorizing a doubling of arms sales, including the largest arms sale to Saudi Arabia of $80 billion worth of arms. The government that had a material role in 9/11. Certainly government agents did. So we're providing nuclear weapons to Iran, $80 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia, and as well as a relationship with Qatar, and it's all predicated on their financing of the Clinton Foundation. This is the woman you want to put in the Oval Office. And then you want to pretend you're serious about national security? I mean, I'd love to get Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, who's voting for Hillary Clinton, on to discuss this because it's just incredible. For more on this and closing arguments, we're now pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Steve Cortes, Trump campaign surrogate. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So how do you feel today? How do you size up the race going into tonight when you've got most of the pundits of the Nate Silver types saying basically Hillary's a 2-1 favorite to win tonight?
Sure. I'm excited. I understand that the models have us as an underdog. I'm fine with that because I think what you can't model, at least not very effectively, is the enthusiasm gap. And there's a massive enthusiasm gap here. I think it's palpable. I mean, we certainly see it at the rallies. I see it just when I talk to people, even anecdotally. As a Chicagoan, I run into a lot of blue voters, of course. But they're voting for Hillary Clinton grudgingly. They're not excited about it. In contrast, when I meet Trump voters, I mean, holy cow, they would chop off a finger to vote for Donald Trump. So the enthusiasm gap tells me that as long as we're close, and we're close in every credible poll within margin of error, as long as we're close, we're going to get this over the goal line today. And by the way, I think one of the reasons I'm so glad, I'm not a huge fan of Assange, but I'm so glad that you're bringing up the corruption of Hillary Clinton. In some ways, I would argue it's even worse than Watergate because Richard Nixon never sold out our national security. Mm-hmm. He just did a lot of terrible things, political dirty tricks. What she has done with Saudi Arabia particularly, and I'm glad you highlighted that, they gave tens of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. They gave $600,000 personally to Bill Clinton for speech in Riyadh. I doubt he stuck up for women's rights, by the way, in that speech in Riyadh. Boeing, who was the seller of most of those arms, Chicago-based Boeing, gave a massive donation to the Clinton Foundation, and voila, the arms deal is approved.
Well, so do you think that this message, though, can get out in time? I mean, people are already going to the polls. 40 million people have already early voted.
Right. Well, I hope so. I mean, day of does still matter, particularly in some really key states that don't have early voting, places like Michigan and Pennsylvania. So I understand that in some places the election may very well be decided before the polls even open today. That's just the reality in places with heavy early voting. But there are some very key states. I was at Trump Tower yesterday, and I have to tell you there, now you'd expect them, I guess, to be enthused as hard as they've worked, but they're incredibly enthused. They believe their internals, their data tells them that we are going to win Michigan, and that's a game changer. And they think we're going to be incredibly competitive in Pennsylvania. They weren't willing to say we're going to win it, but they think we're going to be really, really competitive in Pennsylvania, and they think we're going to win Michigan. And it's interesting. One of the reasons they tell me is that these are the data guys. It's not I'm not one of those. I'm not a number cruncher, but they tell me within the Trump team that Hillary Clinton has utterly failed to sustain the Obama coalition, specifically young people and African Americans. Both of those groups incredibly unenthused about her candidacy, and while she may win those votes percentage-wise, they're not going to come out in significant numbers anywhere near like they did for President Obama.
Well, yeah, and look, some exit surveys have elections like this as much as 15% of the population, 15% of the electorate goes into the polling place undecided, particularly when you have two rather unpopular choices. And so you continue making the arguments till polls close. Absolutely. The interesting thing, too, is what you're talking about in terms of the close. We heard that we heard that from folks in Chicago about the African-American turnout. Talked to a former Pennsylvania State Party chairman yesterday, hearing that about the African-American turnout in Philadelphia. So it seems like in those swing states, like apparently Pennsylvania has become, and Michigan and others, that Trump may need to win if he can't pull off Nevada, if he can't pull off New Hampshire, that depressed turnout from that component specifically of the Obama coalition, despite his campaigning for her, that could be determinative.
It could be. And look, I certainly disagree heartily with President Obama on just about every policy point, but I'll be the first to admit that he's a transformational character, a transformational figure. For America, it's a great thing for our country, right, that a country that used to hold slaves has a black president. It's a great achievement for him as an individual, and people clearly like him, and they rally to him. Hillary Clinton is the antithesis of that, though. She is the embodiment of corruption. She's utterly unlikable. So she is in no way the heir to him in any personal sense. They might try to make that political point, but the people just aren't buying it. And I think, too, this is just so important. When you talk about African Americans and young people, those are two groups, and my own group of Hispanics, groups that are not doing very well in this economy. This is a wonderful economy if you've already made it. If you're an owner of a lot of assets, real estate and stocks, you're doing great. If you're a striver, a wage earner, and again, most people of color, most young people fall into that category. This has been a real slug, this economy. It's been a muddle-through, slow-growth economy, and Obamacare is just the newest bomb dropped on people who are already struggling to make ends meet. And if we win this election, and I think we're going to win it on Obamacare.
Pat Caddell writes for Fox, Dem pollster, but writes for Fox. The American people believe the country is not only on the wrong track, but almost 70% say that America is in actual decline. Wouldn't it be incredible if you have 7 in 10 Americans believing the country's in decline, that they would vote to extend that decline with a 30-year creature of the Beltway?
Right. Well, and I sure hope they don't. And yeah, there's some sad stats out there. More businesses closing and opening for the first time since we've tracked it in America, probably the first time since the Depression. The majority of Americans believe their children will not be as well off as they are. Over the last decade, 4 out of 5, according to McKinsey Consulting, 4 out of 5 U.S. households have seen their income go down. So there's look, we're on the wrong track. They're right. I mean, they know it, right? It's their lived experience. They can't deny the reality that their income's not growing, their expenses are. We're not safe at home and abroad. So the status quo is unacceptable. Hillary Clinton is the status quo plus a nice side serving of corruption to boot. So Hillary Clinton is just unfit to occupy the Oval Office. And what I would try to tell undecided voters or people who are still willing to give us a chance is that Donald Trump, I'll be the first to admit, is a very unconventional candidate. And there's risk in that, of course, somebody who's never held political office. But it's worth taking the risk right now, number one, because Hillary is totally unfit, but number two, because we need a dramatically different course for this country, and we need to smash the Washington system that works for its own benefit to the detriment of the rest of America. And he's the kind of outsider maverick who will do that. He won't tinker around the edges in Washington. He's going in there to smash the K Street cabal.
All right, there's the closing statement. We'll put it to the jury. Steve Cortes, Trump surrogate, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.